In the year 3050, the galaxy was no longer a place of freedom. It had fallen under the rule of the Zelvar Empire, an alien race of immense power. Their Empress, Lady Syra, was a leader like no other. Her strength, intelligence, and cruelty were unmatched, and her desire for total control had spread across the stars. She sat upon the throne in her dark, towering citadel, a place built from black stone and surrounded by the emptiness of space. The citadel was located on the edge of the galaxy, where the stars grew cold and distant. It was a place of fear, for every being in the galaxy knew that to cross the Zelvar would mean certain death. Under her reign, billions of species had bowed before her. All resistance had been crushed. None dared to defy the might of the Zelvar Empire. Yet, there was one race that had stood firm: the humans. Though they were far fewer in number, and their technology far less advanced than that of the Zelvar, humanity had always been known for its determination and resilience. The humans were scattered across distant corners of the galaxy, but they were united by one thing: their unwillingness to submit to the alien empire. They had fought back with whatever they could, from makeshift weapons to stolen technology. The Empress had tried to destroy them many times, but the humans always found a way to survive. At the center of this resistance was a man named John Kavanagh. He was not a soldier. He was a scientist, a humble researcher with no military experience. Yet, in the chaos of war, John had become one of the few who understood how to fight back against the Zelvar. He had spent years studying the ruins of ancient alien civilizations, hoping to find some weapon, some secret that would allow humanity to stand against the might of the Zelvar. He had worked tirelessly, alone in his lab, studying alien texts and symbols no one else dared to touch. It was in these texts that he discovered a strange, ancient artifact, a relic from a civilization far older than the Zelvar Empire itself. The artifact was a small, seemingly insignificant object, an orb, no bigger than a human hand. It was made of a material that no one had ever seen before, a strange, glowing substance that pulsed with energy. When John had first discovered it, he had no idea what it was. But as he studied it, he learned that it held the key to something far greater. This artifact could unlock unimaginable power that could rival the technology of the Zelvar. Now, as the Zelvar Empire continued to crush the last pockets of human resistance, John knew that the artifact was humanity's only hope. With the Empress's forces closing in on the last remaining human stronghold, John had to act quickly. He knew that once the humans fell, there would be no stopping the Zelvar. They would spread their rule across the galaxy without challenge. The final battle was about to begin. In the heart of the human stronghold, a group of brave fighters prepared for the worst. The humans had managed to gather an army, but it was nothing compared to the might of the Zelvar. The Empress's fleet was vast, her ships as powerful as they were deadly. It seemed as though there was no way for the humans to win. They had fought long and hard, but the end was near. John stood among them, his heart heavy with the weight of responsibility. The artifact was in his hands now, glowing faintly with the energy he had only begun to understand. He had no idea how to fully harness its power, but he knew it was their last chance. As the human soldiers prepared for their final stand, John couldn't help but think about the Empress. Lady Syra was no ordinary ruler. She was a force of nature, a being whose mind and will had shaped the galaxy. He had read about her in the records, the ruthless strategies she employed to conquer and control. She was known for her cold, calculating nature, never letting emotions get in the way of her goals. John had never met her, but he had heard stories of her cruelty. She had destroyed entire planets, wiped out entire species without a second thought. And yet, there was something that set the humans apart from the other races she had conquered. They fought back. They fought for their lives, for their freedom, for their future. They fought for something that the Zelvar Empire could never understand: hope. As the battle began, the sky above the human stronghold darkened with the shadow of the Zelvar fleet. Their ships filled the sky like an endless storm. The humans had no chance against them. They knew it. The Empress had ordered the destruction of their last base. She would show them that resistance was futile. John stood at the command center, watching the battle unfold. He could hear the sounds of gunfire and explosions in the distance. The human soldiers fought bravely, but it was clear they were outmatched. They couldn't hold out for long. John gripped the artifact tightly, his thoughts racing. He had to do something. He had to find a way to use the artifact's power. But how? It was then that the ground beneath them shook. A massive ship appeared overhead, its dark silhouette blocking out the stars. The Empress's flagship, the Unyielding Star. It was a ship of legend, a war machine unlike anything the humans had ever seen. It descended slowly, its weapons already charged. The air was thick with fear. The final strike had come. The human forces began to retreat, knowing that their fight was hopeless. John's heart pounded in his chest. He had to act now. He couldn't allow the humans to surrender. Not after all they had fought for. As he stood there, his mind racing, he heard a voice. It was one of the soldiers standing beside him. "Dr. Kavanaugh, we need to get out of here. The Empress's forces are overwhelming us. It's over." John didn't respond. His eyes were fixed on the artifact, and his mind was focused on the power it held. He had studied it for so long, but now he knew that it wasn't just a weapon. It was something more. It could change everything. He stepped forward, the artifact glowing brighter with each step. He had no plan, no backup, but the future of humanity depended on him. He didn't know what would happen when he activated it, but he knew it was their only chance. With a deep breath, he raised the artifact high, and a surge of energy erupted from it. The air around him crackled with power as the artifact's energy filled the sky. The human soldiers stopped in their tracks, staring in disbelief. The artifact's glow grew brighter, brighter than the sun, until it consumed everything in its path, and then everything went silent. The silence that followed was unlike anything John Kavanaugh had ever experienced. It wasn't just the absence of sound. It was a profound stillness, as though the entire galaxy had paused in its tracks. John stood at the center of the human base, the glowing artifact still clutched tightly in his hands. Around him, the soldiers stared, their faces a mix of confusion and awe. They had been bracing for their final moments, knowing that their resistance was about to end. But now, it seemed as though time itself had frozen. For a moment, John could hardly believe what had just happened. He had activated the artifact on pure instinct, but the results were far beyond anything he could have imagined. The energy from the artifact had surged through the base like a tidal wave, cutting through the air with a force that shook the very foundation of the ground beneath him. The strange glowing material that made up the artifact had pulsed with an intensity he had never seen before. In the distance, John could see the massive Zelvar ships in the sky, their weapons aimed at the human stronghold. The sight was both terrifying and awe-inspiring. Yet, after the artifact's activation, the ships seemed to hesitate. A ripple of confusion ran through the Zelvar fleet, as if they were unsure of what had just occurred. John's heart raced. This was it, the moment that could change everything. He didn't know what would happen next, but he knew that the fate of humanity rested on what he did in the next few moments. The artifact had given them a brief chance, a chance to fight back. "Dr. Kavanaugh!" one of the soldiers called out, her voice trembling. "What just happened? What did you do?" John turned to face her, his expression unreadable. "I'm not sure," he admitted. "But it seems like the artifact is more than just a weapon. It's something much more powerful." The soldier's eyes widened. "Do you think it can stop them? The Empress and her army?"
"I don't know," John replied, still staring at the artifact in his hands.
"But it's the only chance we've got." For years, John had studied the artifact, analyzing its strange energy and symbols. He had learned that it was part of an ancient technology, one far older than the Zelvar Empire itself. The artifact had been hidden away for centuries, waiting to be discovered. But its power was unlike anything he had ever expected. It didn't just have the ability to destroy. It could unlock something within humanity, a strength they had never known. He had always thought of the artifact as a weapon, something to use in battle. But now, standing in the heart of the human base, John began to realize that it was more than that. It was the key to humanity's evolution. The artifact held the potential to unlock powers that could rival the greatest forces in the galaxy. As the minutes passed, the silence began to lift, replaced by the sounds of movement and whispers among the soldiers. They were no longer afraid. The artifact had given them a glimmer of hope, a hope that they had not felt in years. For the first time in what seemed like forever, they believed they could win. John paced back and forth, his mind racing. The artifact had activated a hidden energy source, something that was now radiating outward in waves. He could feel the power growing, pulsing within the artifact and around him. It was as if the very fabric of the universe was bending to its will. But what did it mean? "Doctor, what's happening?" The voice of one of the senior officers cut through John's thoughts. The officer was an older man, grizzled and battle-worn. He had seen the horrors of the war firsthand, and now he looked to John as the last hope. "I don't know yet," John replied. "But I think the artifact is connected to something much bigger than just this battle. We need to understand it, or we'll never be able to control it." The officer nodded, his face grim. "Then let's figure it out. Fast. The Zelvar aren't going to wait for us." John turned to face him. Determination setting in. "I know. But the only way we can beat them now is by using the artifact's full power. If we can unlock its secrets, we might be able to shift the balance of the war." The officer stared at him for a moment, then nodded. "We'll follow your lead, Doctor."
"Just tell us what to do." With that, John turned back to the artifact.
The soldiers gathered around him, waiting for instructions. But John had no answers yet. He needed time to think, time to study the artifact. There was no going back now. The war had come to this, humanity's final stand, and the artifact was their only weapon. John's mind was still reeling from the shock of the artifact's power. As he stared down at it, he realized that this was not just about defeating the Zelvar Empire. This was about humanity's future. The artifact wasn't just a tool for war. It was the key to humanity's survival, to a future where humans could stand side by side with any species in the galaxy. The power it held was not meant to destroy. It was meant to awaken something within them, to unlock their potential. The artifact began to hum in his hands, its glow brighter than before. John could feel the energy flowing through him, coursing through his veins. It was as though the artifact was communicating with him, trying to tell him something. He reached out with his mind, trying to tap into its power. Suddenly, a flash of light filled the room. John staggered back, his eyes wide with shock. The artifact had reacted to his thoughts, sending a surge of energy into the air. The soldiers around him took a step back, wary of the sudden explosion of power. John's heart pounded in his chest. This was it. The artifact wasn't just a weapon. It was a force that could change everything. He had to control it. But how? The soldiers watched in silence, waiting for John to make the next move. They knew that this was their last chance. They had to trust him. They had no choice. John took a deep breath, steadying himself. He closed his eyes and focused on the artifact, trying to calm the storm of energy within him. Slowly, he reached out with his mind, willing the artifact to respond. He could feel it. There was a connection, a bond, that ran deeper than anything he had ever experienced. For a long moment, nothing happened. Then, with a sudden surge, the artifact's energy exploded outward, flooding the room with light. John felt his body tremble as the power coursed through him. It was overwhelming, but he refused to let go. He had to control it. And then, just as suddenly as it had begun, The light faded. The artifact dimmed, and John was left standing in the center of the room, breathing heavily. The soldiers stared at him in awe. They had witnessed something extraordinary. What did you do?" one of them asked, his voice shaking. John opened his eyes, his expression unreadable. "I don't know yet, but I think we've just unlocked something. Something that will change the war." He looked around at the soldiers, their faces filled with hope and fear. They had just witnessed the beginning of something new, something that could either save them or destroy them. And in that moment, John knew that the fate of the galaxy rested in their hands. The humans had always been the underdogs in this war. They had fought with courage, with determination, and with the knowledge that they were fighting for their future. But now, with the artifact's power, they had something more. Something that could tip the scales in their favor. The Empress might have her weapons, but the humans had the artifact, and with it, they had the power to change the fate of the galaxy. The human stronghold, once a place of desperate resistance, now stood quiet in the aftermath of the surge of energy released by the artifact. The soldiers, still recovering from the shock, stood around John, watching him closely. They had witnessed something beyond belief, something they didn't fully understand. The artifact had given them a chance, perhaps the only chance they had to survive, but it also left them with more questions than answers. What would happen next? Could they control the artifact's power, or would it consume them? John Kavanaugh stood at the center of it all, his heart pounding in his chest. The artifact was still warm in his hands, its glow now a soft pulse that matched the steady rhythm of his breath. He didn't know what the artifact was. Not fully. He had read the ancient texts. He had studied the alien symbols. But he had never imagined that the device would react the way it had. The surge of energy had been beyond anything he had anticipated, and its effects were still rippling through the galaxy. Above them, the Zelvar ships hovered like dark clouds, their vast shadows casting a chill over the land. John knew that the Empress, Lady Syra, had not yet given up. She would not simply let humanity go free. She would fight until every last human was either dead or under her control. He could see the massive flagship, the unyielding star, hovering above the horizon. Its weapons were charged, its cannons aimed at the heart of the base. The time for peace had long passed. The war was about to escalate to a new level, one that no one could have predicted. The artifact had given them a brief moment of hope, but it was not enough. John had to do more. They had to strike now, while the Empress and her forces were still reeling from the unexpected energy burst. The longer they waited, the more likely the Empress would regroup and crush the human resistance once and for all. The humans had always been the underdogs, but with the artifact's power, they could tip the scales in their favor. But it was a gamble that would determine the fate of the galaxy. "We have to act," John said, his voice steady but filled with urgency. "The Empress will not wait for us to figure this out. She'll strike before we can make our move." "We need to use this power, this artifact, to our advantage." The soldiers nodded, determination growing in their eyes. They had followed John this far, and they would follow him to the end. The artifact had given them a chance to fight back. It was time to take that chance. John looked at the map of the enemy fleet, his mind racing. He knew that the unyielding star was the key to the Empress's power. If they could take it down, the entire Zelvar fleet would fall apart. But the ship was heavily protected. It was a fortress in space, surrounded by hundreds of smaller warships. To attack it head-on would be suicide. They needed a way to break through the defenses and get to the heart of the Empire. "I've been studying the artifact," John continued, his voice focused. "I believe it has the power to disrupt their systems. If we can find a way to use it against their fleet, we might be able to turn the tide in our favor." One of the soldiers, a woman with short black hair and a scar over her left cheek, stepped forward. "How do we do that, Doctor? We don't have the ships or the firepower to go head-to-head with them." John turned to face her, his eyes filled with resolve. We don't need to match them ship for ship. We need to use the artifact to disable their systems, to throw them off balance. If we can make their weapons useless, their ships ineffective, they'll have no choice but to retreat. The soldier nodded slowly, as if considering the plan. And how do you propose we do that? I'll need a team to help me, John replied. We need to find a way to focus the artifact's energy into a beam. Something that can interfere with their systems. It won't be easy, and it won't be perfect. But it's our best shot. Without hesitation, the soldiers began to prepare. They gathered their equipment, making ready for the mission ahead. The urgency of the situation was clear, and there was no time to waste. John had spent years studying the artifact, but now he was going to have to push it beyond its limits. It was a risk, but there was no other choice. The Empress would not show mercy. If humanity was to have any future, they had to take action now. As they prepared to leave, John looked up at the dark sky. The Zelvar fleet loomed overhead, their ships silently waiting for the signal to attack. But for the first time in a long while, John didn't feel afraid. He felt something else. Hope. It was small, a flicker of light in the vast darkness, but it was enough. They set out under the cover of darkness, the soldiers moving swiftly through the corridors of the base. Their mission was simple: get to the enemy fleet and use the artifact's power to disable their ships. They knew the risks, but they also knew that if they didn't succeed, it would be the end of the human race. They were the last line of defense. As they neared the launch bay, John felt the weight of the situation pressing down on him. This wasn't just about defeating the Zelvar. This was about humanity's future, about their place in the galaxy. He had always believed that humans were capable of great things, but now he had proof. They had the strength to fight back. They had the courage to stand up to an empire that thought they were insignificant. They just needed to believe in themselves. The soldiers climbed into the small fighter ships that would take them into battle. There were only a handful of them, too few to make a real impact, but enough to get the job done. They were going to do what no one thought possible. They were going to fight the Zelvar with the only weapon they had, the power of the artifact. John took a deep breath as he strapped himself into the cockpit of his ship. The controls were familiar, but the stakes were higher than ever. He was no longer just a scientist. He was a leader, a symbol of hope for the human race. The soldiers looked to him for guidance, and he couldn't let them down. He couldn't let humanity down. Ready? One of the soldiers asked, her voice coming through the comms. John nodded. Let's do this. The ships lifted off, rising into the sky as the Zelvar fleet loomed in the distance. The fighter ships were small and fast, capable of evading most of the Zelvar's fire, but they would still be outmatched. John knew that their only chance was to hit the enemy fleet hard and fast before they had a chance to retaliate. The journey to the Zelvar fleet was tense, every moment filled with the threat of discovery. But they made it through without incident, slipping past the outer defenses and into the heart of the enemy formation. As they neared the unyielding star, John activated the artifact, focusing its energy into a beam that would disrupt the Zelvar's systems. At first, nothing happened, but then, a ripple of energy shot through the fleet. The Zelvar ships began to shudder, their weapons going offline. The once mighty fleet was now vulnerable, its strength gone in an instant. Now's our chance, one of the soldiers shouted. Attack! With the artifact's power disrupting the Zelvar systems, the humans launched their attack. The fighter ships moved quickly, taking out the remaining warships one by one. The Zelvar forces tried to fight back, but they were no match for the sudden, overwhelming assault. John's heart raced as he watched the battle unfold. It wasn't over yet, but the first victory had been won. Humanity had struck back. The Empress's fleet was in disarray, and for the first time the humans had the upper hand. But the battle was far from over. The unyielding star still remained, and Lady Syra would not let this defeat stand. The final confrontation was coming. The humans had made their move, but the Empress would strike back with everything she had. It was all or nothing now. The battle above the human stronghold raged on. But John Kavanaugh felt an unfamiliar calm settle over him. He watched as his team, the small but determined group of humans, fought with everything they had. It was no longer just about survival. It was about proving that humanity could stand toe-to-toe with the empire that had ruled the galaxy for so long. They were no longer the underdogs. They had the power, thanks to the artifact, to fight back. They had the power to change everything. Yet, as much as he could feel the weight of hope in the air, he also knew that the fight wasn't over. The unyielding star, the flagship of the Zelvar Empire, still loomed above them, a behemoth that seemed invincible. The artifact had disrupted the Zelvar systems and given humanity a fleeting moment of victory. But the Empress, Lady Syra, was not one to give up easily. She had already proven how ruthless she could be, and John knew that she would stop at nothing to crush this rebellion. In the chaos of the battle, John couldn't shake the feeling that the true test was yet to come. The artifact had changed the game, but it had not yet shown its full potential. He had barely begun to understand what it could do, and with the fate of the galaxy hanging in the balance, he needed to learn quickly. If humanity was going to win, they needed to unlock the artifact's power to its fullest extent. John had always believed that humanity was capable of greatness, that they were capable of achieving things far beyond what others thought possible. But this artifact, it was unlike anything he had ever imagined. It was ancient, and its true purpose had remained hidden for centuries. He had always believed that the key to humanity's survival lay in their resilience, their ability to adapt, and their will to fight. But now, with the artifact in his hands, he knew that humanity's future wasn't just about survival, it was about evolution. The artifact held the power to awaken something within humanity, something that had been dormant for far too long. He glanced at the soldiers around him. They were no longer just soldiers. They were a part of something much bigger. They had become symbols of hope for all of humanity. And as they prepared for the final assault on the unyielding star, John knew that this was their moment to prove themselves. This was their moment to show that humanity was not weak, not powerless, and not doomed to fade into the shadows of the galaxy. They had the strength to rise up, to take their place among the stars. The ships flew toward the enemy fleet, now in disarray from the artifact's disruption. The unyielding star was still a formidable force, but its defenses had been weakened. John could feel the energy of the artifact surging through him, guiding him, helping him focus. It was as though the artifact was becoming a part of him, responding to his thoughts and desires. For the first time, he understood what the artifact truly was. It was not just a weapon. It was a tool for unlocking the full potential of humanity. It was a bridge to a future where humans could match the power of the galaxy's greatest civilizations. "Ready?" one of the soldiers asked, her voice steady and calm. She had been with John since the beginning, and the two of them had grown close over the course of the war. They had shared moments of fear, moments of doubt, but now, in the face of the enemy, they shared a common goal. John nodded. "Ready? Let's finish this!" The fighter ships cut through the void of space, speeding toward the unyielding star with the full force of the human fleet behind them. John focused all his energy on the artifact, willing it to respond. The artifact pulsed with power, its glow brighter than ever. He could feel the ship's energy systems faltering as the artifact's energy intertwined with the very fabric of the enemy fleet. It wasn't just disabling their weapons. It was changing them, reshaping the way they operated. It was bending the laws of technology, opening up new possibilities. As they drew closer to the flagship, John's heart raced. The unyielding star loomed larger in front of him, its massive hull filled with weapons of unimaginable power. The flagship's energy shields flared to life as they prepared for the final strike, but this time, it was different. The Zelvar were no longer in control. Their weapon systems were malfunctioning. their shields flickering. The artifact's power was disrupting their entire fleet.
Now's our chance,
one of the soldiers shouted.
Hit them now, before they recover.
John didn't need to be told twice. He activated the full power of the artifact, sending a massive pulse of energy through the fleet. The unyielding star shuddered as the pulse of energy struck its hull, the shockwave sending ripples through the surrounding ships. The Zelvar flagship was temporarily incapacitated, its weapons offline, its shields flickering. For a brief moment, the human fleet had the upper hand. But that brief moment was all they needed. The soldiers launched their attack, using the chaos to strike at the heart of the Zelvar fleet. The fighter ships darted in and out of the chaos, their weapons now operating at full power. John could see the Zelvar ships faltering, their once imposing strength now diminished. They were not invincible. They were vulnerable. And the humans were showing them that they could be defeated. Yet, as the battle seemed to turn in their favor, John's attention was drawn to something else. The Empress herself had entered the fray. Lady Syra stood on the bridge of the unyielding star, watching the battle unfold before her. Her expression was calm, almost serene, as though she were watching a game unfold. She was not one to show fear, not one to admit that she had been outplayed. Her empire was crumbling, and she knew it. But she would not go down without a fight. She turned to her commanders, her voice cold and commanding. Prepare to launch the final assault. We will not allow them to win. John could feel the weight of her words. The battle was far from over. The Empress was not going to let this defeat stand. She would fight until the very end. But now, for the first time, John felt confident that humanity had a chance. The artifact had given them that chance. As the human fleet continued to strike at the weakened Zelvar ships, John's mind raced. The artifact had disrupted their systems, but it was not enough. He knew that the artifact had the power to do more, much more. It could awaken the full potential of humanity, allowing them to match the greatest civilizations in the galaxy. The key was to unlock that potential, to tap into the artifact's true power. He looked at the soldiers around him, each one fighting with everything they had. They were no longer just soldiers. They were part of something much bigger. They were part of a revolution, a movement that would change the galaxy forever. They had proven that humanity was not to be underestimated. They had proven that humanity could rise up and take its place among the stars. The battle raged on, but now, John knew that they could win. The Empress might be powerful, but she was no match for the strength of humanity, and with the artifact's power, they had the chance to prove it. It was time to awaken the true power of humanity. John's hands trembled as he focused once again on the artifact. The energy within him surged, a tidal wave of power that coursed through his veins. He had no idea what would happen next, but he knew one thing: humanity was about to change forever. The artifact pulsed once more, its glow brighter than ever. The power it contained was no longer a mystery. It was the key to humanity's future. And as John unleashed its full potential, he knew that the galaxy would never be the same again. The final strike was coming. And with it, humanity would claim its place among the stars.